Okay.
Couple of technical opportunities for us there.
Yeah, there was a learning experience there.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so good afternoon and welcome. This is your Mountain State update for July 16th, 2017.
And we have our usual audience in the studio with us today.
Yes.
Our dogs.
Yeah, this is your Sunday political sermon right here on WTSQ 88.1 LP. I'm John Canties, and I'm joined by the myth, the man, the public news correspondent, Dan Hyman.
Greetings.
And today we're going to be talking about Donald Trump Jr. We're going to be talking about Obamacare, Trumpcare, and I have an interesting little list of people that might run in 2020, even though it's comically soon to be talking about that. But
Right.
I think it's a fun list that the Boston Globe put out, and it's we may dip into that if we have time here at the end.
We've been meaning to get to that one for a while. So.
Yeah, it's just been kind of on the back burner because, why make it a priority if we have more important stuff. So.
And if you're sick of talking about Donald Trump Jr.'s meetings with the Russians, and there's a lot to say about it, but if you're sick of hearing about it, tweet us at Mountain State Up.
Right, and you can also catch up on older episodes and some other content I've been putting up on the YouTube channel. Right now, I went to the Morgantown Bernie Sanders rally. There were some people there who were telling their stories about how the Affordable Care Act has affected their lives, and it was
interesting.
It was a really good event, and I put all that whole thing uninterrupted up on our YouTube channel. So that's
actually I was interested to note that one of the guys that he featured there at that Morgantown rally was a guy who I had interviewed just a few days earlier about that same topic. Was a guy who survived cancer. Is a guy named Rusty Williams who had cancer, and he told me, he came up to me at an event, and I reported on it for the Public News Service, which you can find stories for the Public News Service at publicnewsservice.org, all one word, .org, two S's in a row, newsservice.org.
Of course.
And he came up to me and said, look, I credit the Affordable Care Act with saving my life. And there have been a number of these stories that have come out, and actually I'm going to be talking to someone.
There's tons of people out there everywhere of all different walks of life who've been affected by that.
Interesting.
And so let's get into this first. This thing with Donald Trump Jr. has been blowing up all week. This is easily the biggest story of the week. And I hate opening up every show with Russiagate, but it is what it is.
Well, it's swallowing everything.
It keeps dripping. That's the point I've heard a few commentators make, and I really agree with it. The fact that this keeps dripping is kind of a clue in and of itself.
Yeah.
Because if there was just a couple meetings with some Russian people and it was just a little shady looking, but there was really nothing to it, they would have just admitted it all at the beginning and gotten it out of the way. That's politics 101.
Right.
If there's a controversy that's brewing and there's people talking about it and it's distracting you from your agenda, then you get out in front of it, you put everything out there, and then you're done. And then it runs its course and you move on. But they haven't been doing that. They've been lying and being caught lying, and they've been obfuscating, and they've been trying to escape it, and they've been admitting just what they have to admit to get through the day, as opposed to what you do when you're really trying to get through with something.
There's a lot to say to that. One thing is that I don't think it's really been dripping. It's been more of a small waterfall.
Sure.
I have never seen, in 30 years of covering politics, I've never seen a scandal of this size move at this speed. It's worth remembering.
Yeah, it's only been like 4 months.
Right. I mean, we're less than 6 months into Donald Trump's term. And what would that be? 1/8 of his presidential term, and people are already talking about impeachment, and it's worth remembering that Watergate took years to get to this point. The congressional investigation, I don't remember when the Ervin Committee, the Watergate Special Committee got started, but it was not until several years into into Richard Nixon's second term, and I remember the burglars were caught essentially the day that they were burglaring, but it didn't unfold it took months and months and months and months.
And the only reason you do that, and this is all, this is just me being as objective as I can possibly be and going where it seems to lead, the only reason that you would handle something like this
Right.
is if lying is worth it.
Right.
Right? I mean, there's no, I mean, because clearly the
Well,
only
they
other option
clearly
is to
don't
get
know
it all
what they're
out.
doing.
Well, they don't know what they're doing also, but they're lying because it's worth it.
Right.
At some level.
Right.
Same reason why Mitt Romney only released 2 years of taxes, even though
Right.
it looked bad. He was willing to take
Take the hit.
It looks, I'll take the hit for only doing so much.
Elvin agrees.
As opposed
my
to
dog Elvin.
Yeah, and he's
older
very
dog.
political.
Yeah, he's highly political.
Yeah.
Max not so much. He's more apolitical. But Elvin is very political.
Well, he's young.
Yeah,
get
he'll
there.
learn. No, I mean I agree. I mean John Oliver calls this stupid Watergate, and I think part of what they're doing is, I mean, a lot of people have put in a fair amount of analysis, basically saying that the culture that Trump and the Trump family came from in New York sort of taught them some behaviors, that if you're arrogant and aggressive and attack all the time, you can really get away with a lot of stuff in the real estate world of New York. But it's a very different world in politics in Washington, D.C. And Rachel Maddow, for example, was talking about the fact that Trump's legal team were recruited from the real estate, from his world in New York, and they're really not suited for this. I mean, temperamentally, they're the kind of people who, they've been caught repeatedly swearing and chewing out people, chewing out reporters, chewing out, there was the head, supposedly the head of Trump's legal team, this guy Kasowitz, is already considering resigning because there have been some embarrassing details that have come out about him, but also because he got into this really aggressive Trumpish email war with a complete stranger for no reason.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot about that particular aspect of it.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Well, I mean, the guy emailed him and said, you really need to resign. This is bad. Some personal details about his background. Apparently, he had had some drinking problems in the past, was having some trouble about whether or not he could get a security clearance. And so this guy emailed him and said, hey, you need to quit. This is bad for the presidency. Right. This is bad for Trump. And Kasowitz, this was like late at night. They got into this, Kasowitz sent him several emails where he swore at him and threatened him and, said, I know where you live. I'm going to, face you. Watch watch yourself, rhymes with rich. F-bomb, drop the F-bomb repeatedly. I mean, it really was completely unnecessary.
I appreciate the self-censorship there, by the way.
Well, who, me?
Yeah,
Swear
yeah.
on air?
You're getting good. You're getting good at that.
I have to remember. but I come from Pittsburgh.
That's fair.
But anyway, this guy Kasowitz, the of course, fish rots from the head. An institution is the length and shadow of an individual.
Right.
This is these are the
tone.
people. Yeah, Trump sets the tone, and these are the people who resemble him, who've been his associates for a long time. This guy, Mark Cohen, who is another one of Trump's associates, one of his personal attorney, was somebody who he brought on board early for this Russia thing. Actually was involved in a couple of very iffy cases with a ex-felon who had been tied in with the New York City Mafia, and let alone, Russians, and had repeatedly threatened people. He threatened a reporter for the Daily Beast that he would, cause him so much legal trouble that he would never be able to get out of it. If this story ever gets on the, on the website, blah, 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 I will sue you to death, basically. At least he didn't swear at him, but everything but.
Right.
And Cohen is one of Cohen's associates is this guy who is a felon because he got in a bar fight with some Wall Street type and stabbed him in the face with a wine glass.
I did hear about that.
Right.
That was
So
a-
these
oh,
are
yeah, that was
these are the people. This is the background of Trump's associates from New York, and they don't translate well to dealing with this problem. We're also seeing that Trump, has had repeated problems staffing his agencies, and I'm not sure why anyone would want to work for the Trump administration.
I reckon that's part of the problem.
I mean, that's part of it. Also, they're not very good at what they're not really used to this. He's used to running a small, closely held circle of people and being able to do everything out of his back pocket and the inside shirt pocket of his son-in-law.
Right.
The other thing, so Trump is really not well suited to this. The other thing that I think is really striking specifically about this Don Trump Jr. Story is a couple of things. One is, as Mark Warner, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is investigating this, pointed out, we now have something like 20 members of the Trump administration who have been forced to admit that they had contact with the Russians.
Right.
20 separate individuals. So it isn't just Don Trump Jr. And at that meeting, it wasn't just Don Trump Jr. Apparently there were 8 people in the room, including the man at the time who was Trump's, I think this was either at the time or maybe before he was Trump's campaign manager. I think he was the campaign manager, Paul Manafort, at the time.
Manafort, and let's not forget the Sessions thing where he
Right.
lied about
Right.
how many meetings he had with Russians.
Right, but Manafort, I mean, remember, okay, so we had Don Trump Jr., we had the president's son, we had his single most important advisor, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
And we had the president's campaign manager who was under the pay of Ukrainian oligarchs who are tied to Putin. All taking this meeting.
All in the same meeting.
All in the same meeting
Right.
with this woman who promised apparently, dirt on Hillary Clinton and left a dossier of documents there with them, and in fact had been in contact. This is another revelation that I think has been getting some publicity. If you hadn't seen this, all the details of this become increasingly damning, which is kind of what I mean when I say it's a small flood. But this woman apparently was close to the high prosecutor for the Kremlin, the top prosecutor in Russia, is a man who's reputed to be deeply, deeply corrupt and has made an enormous amount of money and assembled an enormous, empire of wealth and power from a civil servant's salary there in Moscow, and in fact has become a byword for corruption in Russia. Is a man named, I think his name translates as Seagull. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but he's very close to this woman who took this meeting, right? And it was in the emails.
Now, she wasn't a Russian government lawyer.
No, but there was, she was apparently in close contact with government officials. It was described before it happened, the meeting was described as having information that was being provided by the prosecutor's office. And in fact, another person who was at this meeting was a quote unquote former counterintelligence official, Army counterintelligence.
So it's a lot
operative.
It's a lot of connections that if you look at the big picture, you see them, but you can't, there's nothing on paper that shows.
Well, and apparently that's the way things work in Putin's Russia.
Right. It's the old smart. If you're up to bad stuff, that's the way to do it.
Well, this is the old Russian pattern. The old Soviet pattern is what they used to call the nomenklatura, the names, the apparats, the operators, the apparatchiks. And the nomenklatura was the names that if you could say, oh, well, I'm connected to, Ivan, whoever, then you could get, you could use that to work the world of the Soviet underworld, the undercurrent of how you got things done. That there was a lot of, as the academics would call it, interpermeability between the black market and the government, and power circles, and that's just sort of carried over from the Soviet era into the.
Putin was.
He was
Soviet.
a KGB officer,
Yeah.
former KGB officer. Yeah, and I mean, this
particular story with Donald Trump Jr. has been sort of a microcosm of the entire larger scandal in that it just keeps dripping out.
Right.
And you say flooding out, but it keeps coming.
Yeah.
Whereas, he even went on Sean Hannity, friendly territory here, to talk about it, to get out in front of it. And even after that, we're still learning stuff that wasn't discussed there, obviously, because Sean Hannity handled him with kid gloves and didn't really ask him anything.
Yeah, it was a bunch of softballs. What they call throwing somebody a grapefruit, which is what is the Washington journalism term for a question that's supposed to look tough, but is in fact a softball.
Right. So and it's like there's clearly lying is worth it.
Yeah.
Even with just this little story, or they think it's worth it. It clearly isn't worth it. And
no,
ultimately,
it's not working out. I mean, the other thing that I think is really striking about this, and I think this is, a lot of people are saying that Trump and his associates are in over their heads. And it looks like they finally lawyered up. It looks like they finally got some decent legal help. There was this Democratic lawyer who had been working for Trump Jr., who has resigned. I forget what her name is, but she's a big D.C. lawyer associated with Democrats, and she apparently had been signed on to help Trump Jr., but then she decided maybe she wanted to get out of this thing.
Right.
But the other thing that has been dripping out, John McCain's expression is that this is the centipede of scandals. There's always another shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. Is that there have been apparently, and we're starting to see reports of this in various press outlets, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, and a number of others, McClatchy. I mean, everybody's getting in on this thing. Everybody's working their intelligence sources because there have been repeated reports, CIA, FBI, foreign allied intelligence, operations in Europe, of connections between the Trump world and the Russians. And in fact, the CIA was getting so many, contacts, and this is dating back a couple of years. Some of this stuff, I think, goes back to 2015. Mm-hmm. They were seeing so much, as the expression goes, chatter. There was so much talk between people close to Trump and various Russian operatives that the CIA assembled a dossier and turned it over to the FBI, which is where some of this investigation really started. So this was already these investigations were already underway before the 2016 election. And now how we got from the point of having this guy who was under investigation end up winning the 2016 election is an interesting point in and of itself. I think part of the reason for that, and I think that's an issue that is worth considering. And of course, the Comey letter is part of that, the famous Comey letter, a few days before the election. But part of the reason for that is because America's intelligence community is very careful not to try to get involved in American domestic politics. In fact, it's not legal for the FBI, for the CIA, to do investigation of domestic issues. Now they do, of course, or they have in the past. I think they're pretty clean these days. But they're very careful about not trying to get involved or trying not to get involved in American politics. The irony here is that in a way, by avoiding that, they have ended up creating more influence, in the
things
election.
get out of control.
Yeah,
in that way.
and this is why we were hearing from the FBI about Hillary Clinton's emails when we weren't hearing about Trump's Russia contacts. Now, another thing that's interesting, and I don't want to go on too much length.
Sure, finish your point,
this,
though.
but there are a lot of conservatives. There's a lot of the conservative media, some of the less credible edges of the conservative media, the more partisan press, some of the more partisan members of Congress, especially in the House as opposed to the Senate, who are still defending Trump. And in Anderson Cooper's famous phrase to one of these surrogates, he said, the president could take a dump on his desk and you'd defend him.
Right. And the guy he was talking to, he was right about that.
Oh, yeah.
That guy, I forget that guy's name, but yeah, he has no soul.
On this show, we've talked about the tribalism of American politics. Mm-hmm. At some point, this is going to have to break.
You would think so. I don't know what has to happen now. I mean, it's like everything that's happened so far, you'd think it would have broken already.
There was somebody who was saying on Twitter, I'm trying to, the almost the exact quote is, I'm trying to imagine what Paul Ryan would say if Chelsea Clinton had taken this meeting.
Hey, she's new with this.
No, he's only 36 years old.
He wouldn't have said that.
He's only the been closest to the one of the most important real estate empires in the country.
So we got Representative Brad Sherman,
right,
introducing articles of impeachment.
Sherman's a fairly
President
partisan Trump. Democrat.
Sure, but this is an important development too, because these are this is the article of impeachment. I mean, this is the real deal, and he introduced an article of impeachment against President Trump on Wednesday that accuses the president of obstructing justice. So this is about the obstruction of justice issue that came up during the Comey, when Comey was all over the news. And
when Comey was fired and then, came forward and it turned out that it was about, and this is
my question is, does he have a real, is this a real case here?
I think so. I think that
we talked about that at length, and I remember us kind of coming to the conclusion, this is obstruction of justice.
Well, the lawyers that I've heard from and I've talked to about this have said, obstruction is tough to prove, especially when you have an executive who is able to, take an action without, for whatever reason he wants, such as firing the FBI director. Mm-hmm. But what has been striking to me and to other people, and this is what I think makes this case simpler, maybe a lot easier to prove, and maybe a lot easier to make stick than some of these other parts of the Russiagate scandal. Mm-hmm. Stupid Watergate, as John Oliver calls it.
Stupid Watergate, yeah.
Is that there's a pattern. So we don't just have Comey's firing. We have the president coming out on national television, and boy, was this stupid, coming out on national television soon afterwards and saying, I did it because of the Russia investigation. His staff had been saying it's because of this, Justice Department memo and blah, 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 blah. So we have the confirmation afterwards that why he did it. We have the discussions before it happened with Comey saying, I wish you could let this thing go.
Now, granted, though, that's still he said, she said. Because, Trump says that didn't happen, and Comey says it did. There's not a recording of it. There's not a third party.
This is where the circumstantial evidence becomes important, because we also have Trump saying similar things to other people. We have Trump saying similar things to the director of the NSA. We have Trump saying similar things to, I think it was at the time, director of national intelligence. I'm not sure. But there were at least two high-level intelligence officials, who said, that Trump said to them basically the same thing, that, I hope you could go out into the press and squash this story. I don't think it's a legitimate story. I want it to go away. Mm-hmm. And then he says that to Comey, and then he fires Comey. And then he comes out in the press and admits it, that this is, why he did it. So this is why I think the conspiracy, obstruction of justice.
That's the Watergate element.
Right.
Right.
It's the cover-up that
That's
kills
what makes
you.
it Watergatey.
Right.
Now, what makes it stupid is that now there's a special investigator, Mueller, who seems very serious.
Oh,
he's already
very
hired.
serious
He's hired like 13 other lawyers.
Oh, he's a very
Most of them
serious
are
guy.
Hillary people.
Oh, really? I hadn't
Yeah,
seen
most
that.
of them are people who donated heavily to Hillary. So I mean, now they're really after him because of
Yeah.
that. So that's
And
the
this is
stupid part. Now it's stupid Watergate.
Right, and Comey is a serious guy. Mueller is a serious guy. I mean, these are you don't screw around with these guys. You don't hire some attorney who can't get a security clearance to defend you against Comey and Mueller. It isn't going to work. Mm-hmm. And that's
Very different types of people than Trump.
Yes.
You don't rise through the ranks of the FBI,
No.
and you don't get to where these guys are by being the type of people Trump is.
one of the
know what I
things that struck me after Comey came forward and said that he had these memos is that there were a lot of people who came forward and said this is standard FBI practice. You document everything.
Right.
And the fact that Comey felt concerned enough to document his meetings with the president and to actually inform other people about them at the time.
Right. In the car ride on the way out of there, he was telling people.
that helps substantiate his story.
Sure.
So if it becomes he said versus he said, which again I think is part of the reason why the obstruction charge is going to be easier to make. But there's a number. This is turning into this hydra-headed thing.
So you think do you think that this article of impeachment that's been put in by the California Democrat is going to go anywhere?
Well,
to me, it looks like jumped the gun a little early.
Well, I mean, a couple of points. First of all,
And it feeds the narrative that the Democrats are just after him.
yeah,
And they'll just
but
do anything.
there's no. I mean, the Trump administration, Trump himself, and the partisan tribal nature of American politics means that there's no cost to this Democrat for doing this.
No.
He can
In fact,
go
it
back
might help
to his,
him.
Yeah, he can go back to his constituents, and they probably love this,
Right.
Because he's in basically a blue district in California.
Yeah, he's in California.
And he can go back to them and say, I did this,
And if it all does blow up, and if Trump really does go down, he can be the guy who did it first. And,
right.
You know
and
what I mean?
and
So-
the thinking is that usual with any kind of legislative process, and the fact that this is a political legislative process, we'll come back to that in a second. But the fact that what you do with those kinds of efforts is they take a long time, and you start out and then you tend them. And then what will happen is if this gets bad, it'll take a step forward, and I think one of the things that's going to be interesting to watch about this, because the description I'm hearing from people inside the Beltway is that there are a lot of Republicans who really are very upset and extremely critical of Trump for this situation, but they can't say that in public, right?
Right. I
They
mean,
can't
that's,
come out because their partisans will
it hurts your team.
Right. It hurts your team, and it would hurt you with your base.
Right.
But what might happen, and this is, I would have said a month ago, I would have said that there's no way, but now what we may see, cross our fingers, is that rather than trying to stop this, a lot of these Republicans may kind of stand back and let it happen.
Oh yeah. I mean,
They may make noise about how they don't like it, but they kind of let
They're not
it
gonna do
work
anything
its
to
way
stop it.
through,
Yeah.
which is really the crucial point now, because the impeachment and all of these kinds of situations, once you get into the Congress side of it, it is no longer a legal issue so much as it is a political issue.
right.
Right. So there is advantage to making the obstruction of justice charge. It's easier to make because the president's fingerprints are on it directly, but it still is a political equation. you still have to get it through the House.
I'm
and the
afraid
Senate.
for the big picture, though, could be too many chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
We almost kind of have that going on already because we have a House investigation, we have a Senate investigation, we have the FBI,
Yeah.
and we have the special prosecutor.
Yeah.
I mean, and they don't want to step on each other's toes, and that's why, like certain investigations don't have access to certain things because the FBI is in the middle of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we already almost have too many chefs in the kitchen, but.
Well, where you're going to have that problem is if these committees, like the Senate Intelligence Committee, and there's also a House committee, and I think there's a Senate Judiciary Committee. If they want people to testify publicly, like for example, there may be a negotiation with somebody like Michael Flynn over whether or not they grant them immunity. So if they grant Flynn immunity, that means that he's safe from the
Well, they're not going to do that, though.
special investigators as well.
They already said they're not going to do that, though, didn't they?
Right, but I bet that there are discussions with his lawyer. I'm sure that they would love to have him come and testify.
Yeah,
So
let's
there's
not
this-
forget about Mike Flynn, because that's my prediction with all this, is that Flynn is, he's the kingpin of all this, I think.
Right, and you're going to have, Flynn, and you're going to have these hearings. They're going to be must-watch television for those of us in the political world, and
It should be everybody.
it's going to be. This thing is going to go on for ages. In part of the reason I think it's going to go on is because I don't think Trump is the kind of guy who resigns.
Oh, no.
I mean, one of the interesting things is that we're also starting to see indications about whether, what's his name, Pence, Mike Pence actually took some meetings with the Russians, which is interesting too, because of course I guess after Pence it would be what, Paul
Ryan, and then Exxon
Orrin
guy.
Hatch. No, Orrin Hatch.
What
who's
position?
He's president pro tem, which is basically of the Senate, which is basically the longest serving senator. It used to be Robert Byrd for years and years and years.
Okay.
But Hatch is the guy after Byrd died. He became the longest tenured senator.
Gotcha.
And then I think it moves into Tillerson.
As a political strategy, though, I don't want. I think it would be a mistake for Democrats to lose sight of all the terrible things that the Trump administration is doing right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Russia thing, I think there's plenty of resources going into that. Let that do its thing. But I mean, let's not forget, within a month of his presidency,
right,
he had this terribly botched raid in Yemen and killed a girl, an American citizen, didn't get any information out of it.
Right.
There are things you can talk about that aren't this.
Right.
Trumpcare is going to cut Medicaid by almost $1 trillion.
Right.
Throw almost 30 million people off of it. I mean, there's a lot of facts on the ground right now that people can be talking about. If you're trying to beat Trump in 2020, I don't want to see Democrats nonstop Russia.
And
I don't
I
want to see that.
And this is actually, I'm actually been most of the reporting I've been doing lately, and you can find my reporting at publicnewsservice.org.
Boop.
And you can tweet me at PNS_WV, or you can tweet us. In fact, let us know what you think of the show at Mountain State Update, Mountain State Up,
At Mountain State Up.
At Mountain State Up on Twitter.
Not long enough of a box for
And
Mountain
you
State.
can, that's right. And you can hear us online at WTSQ.org, and you can listen to us Sundays from noon to 1 on WTSQ LP 88.1 Charleston.
Right.
Anyway, most of my reporting has been on the healthcare stuff.
Right. So let's actually go ahead and move on to that.
Right.
Speaking of getting off the Russia thing, let's get off the Russia thing. Okay. Looks like the repeal and replace of Obamacare is in just as much turmoil as it ever has been, if not more.
Hanging by a thread, really.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, Dan, but I think they suspended the recess.
Right.
So they could work on it some more, or Mitch McConnell did.
Yeah.
And now they're buying even more time.
The August recess in half is what he did.
Right. So now they're buying even more time because I guess John McCain's in the hospital.
John McCain's in the hospital.
So now they're using that to buy more time.
Well, if McCain can't vote, then I don't know if he could vote from his hospital bed.
Was he in favor of it?
He was critical of it, but I don't know. I don't know if he's declared clearly.
You never know what he's going to do.
But if he
The
doesn't,
Maverick.
yeah, if he's certainly no fan of Trump, and he and his compadre Lindsey Graham have been two of the real strong
Yeah, him and
critics
Lindsey Graham, yeah.
in the Senate of Trump and of the Trumpcare efforts. Now, it's worth pointing out, although we're calling this Trumpcare, the president has been singularly disengaged on this issue. I mean, he apparently lobbied.
This is McConnell's thing.
This is McConnell and Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
It's McConnell's baby right now.
I honestly think it would be doing better if Trump were at the front of it. Because at least, Trump's supporters like him.
Yeah.
No one likes Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan.
Yeah. But Mitch McConnell is a much, much, much better inside player.
Sure.
I mean, Trump, I don't think he's really even knows what's in this thing or doesn't really care.
No, he doesn't
put
care.
it that way.
Yeah, he doesn't know.
I mean, maybe he does know or would know if he was paying attention, but he's obviously A, distracted, and B, just not very interested in it. So he wants the win.
He wants a win. Yeah, he just doesn't care what it is.
Not only, I mean, even before the Russiagate, but even before the junior meeting came up, he was already pretty disengaged from this. But Mitch McConnell, I mean, it's hanging by a thread. He's really been working this about as hard and probably about as smart as he can. I mean, the whole process of doing it in secret and then springing it on people, that was smart. I mean,
Was it, though? I don't know.
I think so. I think it was about as well. I think those were the cards that he was dealt, and that was about the best way he could play.
He wanted
it.
people to have as little time as possible to digest it. Basically.
Right. I mean, basically, he's trying
Which
to...
says a lot about your agenda.
Right.
When the better your agenda does is equal to the little people know about it, right?
There was, in fact, a reporter at the West Virginia State Capitol who got arrested for trying to find out some information about this.
Oh yeah, who was that?
Yeah, it was, I don't know, some guy needed a shave.
Hey, can you give us an update on that? By the way, how's it going?
Nothing to say really. I mean, the wheels of justice turn very slowly.
Right.
I have. As of now, there's a hearing scheduled for the end of August, but it's just a pretrial hearing, and who knows whether that'll actually happen or not. It looks like it looks like it's going ahead right now.
Okay, they're going to drop it. I suspect.
Well, they have made.
Or maybe they want to make an example out of you. I don't know.
We can't. My legal team has been suggesting that we be sort of play this close to the vest right now.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But right now it's there's no news to report. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough.
Anyway, the charges are still pending. But anyway, so I mean, and there was an interesting report. Aaron Beck at the Charleston Gazette did an interesting report where she FOIA'd some of the inside documents leading up to that meeting, and it was pretty clear from the communications between the state capitol and the White House that they wanted to keep this as focused on the opioid crisis and not on the healthcare repeal broadly as possible. And they wanted to keep, there was the possibility of protesters. There was the sort of the outgrowth of all of the angry town halls, which we saw this spring. They were, concerned about that kind of public perception. And so they were keeping public availability and press availability down to an absolute minimum.
Capito flipped. So Capito's not voting for it right now.
She's not.
Right.
Is she? I don't know.
Well, that was the last thing she said was that she's not voting for it.
But that was the last version.
Right.
That's before they took it.
That was that's the key phrase. I'm not voting for it in its current form.
In its current form.
I
mean, and this gets back to Mitch McConnell's, the secrecy and how he's been playing this, because he's relying on the fact that Republicans are under enormous pressure to do something. They really have promised for 7 years.
We're looking at going into the midterms with nothing done, other
So
than
far.
other than poisoning some streams.
Yeah.
That's basically all they've done.
Well, I mean, we can talk about the things that the White House is managing.
A lot of those
to do.
little
There's
rollbacks.
education stuff, and there's some executive policies which look very unpleasant. And there's another thing I'm reporting on these days is this attempt to, which is the Interior Department allied with some Western, very conservative Republicans,
some executive stuff,
right, to roll back some public lands.
Right, but the big, high-profile legislative wins, they're going into midterms with nothing, and that's not good.
But they've promised for whatever it is, 7 years, 8 years, or whatever it is, 7 years, to repeal this thing, to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
They voted to do it like 40 times in the House,
something like 40 or 50,
maybe 50. Yeah, I don't know, stop counting.
But they now they have to go back to their base and say, we promised this, now we have power, now we've done it, or their base is going to abandon them. And everything in the Republican Party is base-oriented.
What a ridiculous lose-lose situation they've put themselves in. Because now if they pass it, they're going to hurt because so many of their constituents depend on it in one way or another, and have become, whether they know it or not, so many of their constituents depend on some aspect of the Affordable Care Act. This is why the the polling on the legislation is so bad. I mean, the specific House and Senate legislation to repeal and replace is the numbers it's getting are lower than 20%. I mean, I've seen 17. Other people have seen lower than that. I read it was the least liked piece of legislation in 20 years.
I would not be surprised.
Right. I can't think of anything that's gotten more negative reaction than that.
I mean, what happens is that people like to complain. The public, this is a basic truth about American politics.
I mean, that's what this show is.
People like to complain, right? So they like to attack something that's in place. So they like to attack...
because it's already in place, and you understand it better because it's already in place. It's not a theoretical thing. So
it's like the difference a lot of people were talking about between Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. My doctor said people hate Obamacare, but they love the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
Well, of course, they're the same thing.
Right.
But they don't. They're thinking of Obamacare in political context, and they always like to criticize politicians until they leave office. And then they attack it. But then when they deal with the policy and they can't be denied because of pre-existing conditions, or their kids can get on their insurance policies, or they have limitations on how much they can pay. The insurance companies, how much they can charge, the difference between a young person and an old person. They all that stuff. They start to like that. No lifetime caps, no annual caps. All
once
that
it actually affects them.
Right. But they don't really think of that in terms of a political conflict. That's just a sort of a fact of life that the insurance companies can't do this. And once you start monkeying around with that, and once you start monkeying around with the fact that you're monkeying around with Medicaid, which has turned out, interestingly, to be the big landmine that the Republicans... I find that pretty fascinating. So let me back up and explain that.
There's you can look into it. There's way more higher population, like percentage-wise, per capita of people in red states on Medicaid.
Right.
I mean, there's many Republicans are on it.
There's a lot of poor rural
in the South and in the middle of America. There's tons of people on Medicaid.
Yeah.
And when they realize that, they realize, oh, this is what Obamacare is. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so...
changes the whole conversation a little bit.
Back up for a second, because at the top of the show you mentioned that they're going to cut Medicaid by the Republicans, it was 800 and something
800 billion
billion in the Senate bill, and then there was the Trump budget outline that was actually more cuts on top of that. It was cut a quarter out of it, and then cut another. I think it was another 10%.
When did he put that budget out? I haven't even looked into that yet.
Yeah, it was earlier this year, and it's a budget. It was really. It really doesn't have any bearing right now.
Right.
It was sort of a statement of his intentions, but their intentions. But
that's all budgets really are.
Well,
At least on the national level.
I don't want to get too deep into the federal budgeting process. But at this point, it's really just a statement of intention.
Yeah.
So I think especially Paul Ryan, who's been trying to get at Medicaid for years, they've been looking at this as their opportunity to roll back a big federal entitlement program, a big federal budget item, right? And they've been, he's been wanting to do this for years, and I think he thought that there wasn't enough of a constituency to defend it, right? As the old saying goes among the social justice types, it's tough to lobby on behalf of welfare mothers. They don't have a good lobbying organization.
Right.
Right?
I mean...
But what has turned out is that, lo and behold, especially in West Virginia where Medicaid is expanded, especially in some of these red states where Medicaid is expanded, and in poor states where a lot of people depend on Medicaid, many of them red states, it turns out that there really is a constituency. That guy we were talking about before, Rusty Williams, who spoke at the Bernie Sanders rally, his medical care was through the Medicaid expansion. Right? And so when people stand up and say, Medicaid expansion saved my life, don't roll back the Medicaid expansion, that cuts ice. Even in Washington.
Yeah.
So,
that affects people.
So that's kind of interesting to me that, lo and behold, it's turned out to be, much more popular than maybe we thought it would be, and that's part of the reason it's so unpopular.
Yeah, I was surprised with how quickly that turned around. I figured it would, but it turned around quickly.
One quick plug. I'm hoping this afternoon, in a couple of hours, to talk to Reverend Janice Hill. I think it's Janice.
Oh, yeah.
From Parkersburg, who got a bit of viral fame by telling Senator Capito that the Affordable Care Act saved her daughter's life. Now, Reverend Hill may be announcing a hunger strike.
Let's do that.
Right.
Do what you're doing there with her, and then see if we can't get her on here.
In a week.
Because I'd like to get on here next week.
Yeah, we'll see if we can do that.
I sent her a Facebook message. Never got a response, but I don't know. She might not be good at Facebook or whatever.
Right.
But so let's try to get her on here too. That'd be fun.
Okay, let's talk about who's running for president real quickly.
Well, we don't have time because it's 20 people. So we'll do that next week. We'll put that off again. But I do want to go into the, we do have one thing that we like to do at the end of the show. And it's
yes, we have to make time for the tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week, a.k.a. Tiny Fingered Bully Report.
The Tiny Fingered Bully Report.
Let's see, which one here? Where
is it by the way, for those who haven't gotten the joke, that is the Russian national anthem.
With all of its phony, unnamed sources and highly slanted and even fraudulent reporting, #fake news is distorting democracy, capital letters, in our country. And I agree, actually. Fake news is distorting democracy, but it's not CNN, it's Fox News.
Yeah.
CNN's incompetent, maybe, but...
According to John Oliver, the one to watch now, Fox is actually occasionally doing credible reporting. They have some good people there.
Okay.
But we'll see about what Sinclair Communications looks like in a couple years.
That's a...
So we'll see.
That's a big old boogeyman coming up.
Yeah, well, don't get scared of it before it becomes scary.
With Sinclair?
Yeah, don't... don't overreact. Don't overreact.
I don't know. They make those... you saw John Oliver talk about it. They make those must-run things that are just like rants against snowflakes and,
But this is part of the problem with American tribal politics is you tend to get so scared and wound up about stuff that, you sort of lose track of what's really going on.
Sure. So we do our best to sort it out here. So
that's right.
So Dan, I want to thank you for coming in. Let's try to get the Reverend on next week.
Yeah, we'll try.
Maybe get Ted on too. It's been a while since we've talked to old Ted.
Yeah, and maybe eventually we'll talk about who's running for president.
Yeah, we've had that We almost got to it this week. We almost got to it. Maybe next week.
Well,
We'll see.
I had too much to say. I'm sorry.
Well, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be 5 other things that are going to happen this week, and we're not going to ever get to it. So
I know.
that's just the way it's going to be.
Well, but we've got a couple of years. So,
right.
hey,
Yeah, we got a couple years.
It's not
maybe,
till 2020.
Sure. So I want to thank everybody for listening here to the Mountain State Update on WTSQ 88.1 LP here in Charleston, West Virginia. I'm
Hit us
John
up.
Canty.
Let us know what you think at Mountain State Up.
Yeah, follow us on Twitter and look up that YouTube channel. It's Mountain State Update on YouTube. All these episodes are going on there, plus some other stuff I throw on there from time to time that's relevant.
And of course, you can hear us online at WTSQ.org.
Absolutely. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.
Rockabilly time.